Hello and welcome to our podcast Hearts Histories. In this 5-episode series, I'll be speaking to 6 older and old LGBT plus people who live in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, and reflecting on how their lives and experiences have made them the person they are today. This is available in both video and audio, so if you're currently watching and would rather be listening, head to any of the podcast apps and search for Embrace Inclusion to find our channel. Or equally, if you'd rather be watching this series, then our YouTube channel is Embrace Inclusion. Or head to the website lgbtsand.com to find it. So, on to the show. This episode's guest is Peter Roscoe, who was born in 1952 and is in his early 70s. He lives in Shrewsbury and is adjusting to life after losing his long-term partner Geoff last year. Peter has many stories to tell from his lifetime of activism and involvement in local LGBT plus organising in Shropshire. We hope you find this episode really insightful and that after listening to the conversation, you'll be able to better understand the older and old LGBT plus people you interact with as part of your work. It is the Hearts and Histories podcast, and thank you so much, Peter Roscoe, for joining us. Thank you so much. So let's talk about where you grew up. Where did you grow up, Peter?
Macclesfield in Cheshire.
And what was that like growing up there?
It was okay, really. Mostly my memories are good. Up to 12.
So mostly?
Yeah.
Mostly was good.
Yeah, I would say so.
That's not a bad thing to do. What about early relationships? When did you kind of become interested maybe in...
Other boys, probably around about 13 or 14. I knew I was different. I knew I wanted to meet other boys or men. Now, quite where I got the idea from or how, but I used to go out to Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester and sort of loiter. I had no idea what I was doing and no idea of the danger I was putting myself in.
And how old were you then at this
I was about 13 or 14.
So about 13 or 14.
Yeah.
And so what happened at Piccadilly Gardens?
I just sort of fecklessly stood around and then went and got my milkshake and went home. Nothing ever happened.
Nothing ever happened, but it was kind of you wanted that experience.
I did, yeah. Well, there was no reference. I had no idea. There was nothing to tell me anywhere, and there was no one to ask. The messages were generally very negative about boys like me. And thinking back, I think it's really hard to convey how absolutely awful and oppressive it was to grow up gay. And it was hardly even possible to say the word. I don't think we used the word gay. It would have been homosexual or, pervert or something like that. And the images on television, Danny LaRue and all that, didn't make sense to me to identify with. And
so I guess that there wasn't anywhere that you could turn, no one that you could go to talk to about how you were feeling. Was that?
Yeah, no. Any sort of trusted authority figure, I don't know, vicar, teacher, doctor, no, impossible. And parents too, just too embarrassing. Because they weren't homophobic in the sense that they were prejudiced, but they were in the sense that my 2 older sisters and brother were all heterosexual, and so there was an expectation that that's how the world was. There were references to an uncle called Uncle Geoffrey, which were always slightly, he's never going to get married, is he? With a sort of a tone to it. Or I remember my dad saying something about Geoffrey and him being on a holiday somewhere and how there were lots of pretty young women around, but Geoffrey wasn't at all interested.
So what did you do? What did you, presumably you didn't discuss this with your parents? You didn't?
No. Well, I was in really a very confused state, and I'm sure that's why I then failed all my O-levels, which I suppose would be GCSEs now. Just failed a lot and was asked to leave school.
So what happened next?
Well, then I went to Macclesfield College of Further Education, which was fantastic. And then I got sort of every O-level going and 4 A levels as well, and made my decision to get as far away from Cheshire as possible.
So having made that decision, having had the academic success, where did you go? Where, wanting to get as far away as possible?
Yeah, well, I got interested at college in sociology, and one of the best places to do that was Essex University. Another reason for going there, I've just remembered, was in the handbook for the university, it actually had a Gay Liberation Front Society. And although that seemed very scary and I wasn't quite sure what it would be about, I thought, well, this could be good. But in terms of getting into the culture of university, although it was a nice group of guys who I was living with in a kind of a boarding house, they were very much talking in terms of their girlfriends, talking about chicks, and it's just totally alien to me.
So did that make you feel kind of a bit isolated?
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. And also, although I saw the gay liberation people, they seemed so out on a limb. I couldn't quite connect with them either. So it was quite a hard journey, and a lot of sort of, a bit like jumping into a cold sea. You know, you just sometimes have to take a very deep breath, notice that there are other people swimming, and do it.
So is that what you did?
Yeah.
In what way?
Well, then I moved to London.
Yes.
From going to Essex University. And then that's when I contacted Gay Switchboard in London. And then through that found out more about where there were gay pubs. There was Heaven, which was a big nightclub under the arches at Charing Cross. That's more where I found a gay life and other gay people.
So is that when, did you start having relationships then? Did you?
Yeah, a few, but because I'd got into my head that, we needed to have big social change. That, so I became very much a strong socialist. And I took on board the idea that if we could get that right and have a socialist revolution and a much fairer distribution of power and wealth and better access to education, health, housing, all the rest of it, then issues around men and women, sexuality would sort of melt away. So that was my priority. So I was one of these people out on the street of Lewisham shouting socialist worker.
So you were there
every Saturday morning.
You were there doing that. Was it on one of these campaigns? Was that where you met Geoff? Was that where you met Geoff?
No, I met Geoff on a bus.
Oh yeah.
But yes, it was to do with campaigning, because one of the badges you could get then had on it Gays Against Fascism, and I was wearing one of those on a 75 bus going to my socialist worker meeting. And Geoff got on the bus and saw my badge, came up to me and said, I like your badge and I like you too. So that was nice.
You're doing the campaigning. What about that gay lifestyle? Were you leading that in London?
Yeah, I was going to Heaven with my friend. And there was a pub we used to go to after the socialist workers' meetings, which was opposite Ladywell Baths, called the Ladywell Tavern. And anyway, one day Geoff was there. He'd kind of worked out that's where I might be. So he was very lovely, and there he was.
He tracked you down.
He did. He did. He said he saw me walk in with Ken on my arm, but then he realised Ken was a sister.
So I mentioned Geoff because I know you and Geoff were together for a number of years. In fact, you were the first couple to have a civil partnership in Shropshire. Is that right?
Well, or possibly... in a registry office in the country, because there was a countdown and there were a number of couples all around the country claiming that at 8 o'clock on the 21st of December they were the first.
What was that like, getting to do that then?
Oh, it was fantastic. It was fantastic. It was just like a stepping stone in trying to get equality.
So what brought you to Shropshire then? What brought you here?
Knowing Geoff, his parents lived in Clive, just north of Shrewsbury. Really good cycling country, North Shropshire. Also, it was the 80s, and things were getting difficult in the 80s because of the AIDS crisis. So quite a few people we knew were ill or dying.
What are your memories of the AIDS crisis? Obviously, it was a huge thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, very, 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 very frightening as the thing started to unfold. This notion of that it was to do with haemophiliacs, Haitians and homosexuals, and then those first images coming across from the United States of these emaciated people who were just going to die and die horrible deaths. And just young men. So it was incredibly frightening. And where we lived in London, we, for a time, shared our flat with somebody who contracted AIDS. He was actually from Nigeria. And it was awful on so many different levels, but one was the way he was in isolation in hospital. And it sort of brought it all a little bit back with COVID, that approach to people of, barrier around them, people in suits, people in gloves, food just being pushed sort of through a little hatch. That was just terrible. And also the reaction of people to us and to his and from his family. It's like a double whammy of, almost a fulfillment of every horror. Not only are you a pervert, but you are a diseased pervert and you are no child of ours. Just ghastly, and I knew of that happening a few times. So very, very frightening. And it had a long-lasting thing too, because until relatively recently, there was no way of dealing with AIDS. Once you had a positive diagnosis, then, you were going to die. So for Geoff, it was always, Geoff and I, it was always a thing of thinking, well, there's no point us taking a test. We could either of us be positive, but there's no point. We just have to live with that. So that affected our lives for quite a while. So I think for me still, in terms of any care setting or hospital, there's an awareness of illness can be stigmatized, and you can become, like we did for a while with the tabloids, calling it the gay plague.
So were you always open about being gay? Were you always...
Yeah, I suppose certainly from London days, and I came out to my mum around about when I was 16. But as you probably realise, it's a bit exhausting coming out because it never ends. You're always coming out, even today in situations, people's assumption, understandably, perhaps, maybe they shouldn't make assumptions, but is that you will be heterosexual.
So does that get tiring? Does that get...
Yeah, it is, and it's something to learn to deal with, because initially I think you can feel quite angry about it, people making assumptions, but people on the whole aren't being unkind. They don't mean to cause you trouble, but it does, and particular in the context when Geoff got ill, because Geoff died a year ago now, and going through the hospital and caring system, dealing with issues around next of kin, and how we referred to ourselves. They were always like little niggly bits to get around, which kind of were tiresome.
When you're going through
Other
an awful
stuff.
lot anyway.
Yeah.
To not have to deal with that. I'm really sorry to hear about Geoff, by the way. Really, really sorry. How are you now? How are you in your life, Peter?
Well, it's a year on, and yeah, it's a cliche, but time is a healer, and I know he would be like now I could imagine him saying, yeah, just get on with it.
Yeah, which is obviously easier said than done, let's face it, but it is.
Just do it. And maybe that's another thing, I don't know, maybe it's an age thing. You realise time is very short. So now I'm kind of beginning to get into a new relationship with somebody, and I'm realising, well, because I met Geoff in my 20s, I never thought about where we were going in the future. You know, you just do it, don't you? You make a relationship and you follow this road and that road and the other road. Well, now I'm thinking, my dad died at 89. That means I've got perhaps 17 years, more or less. Perhaps a chunk of it not with the greatest of health. And these are now much more major considerations in having somebody come into your life.
So does that give you some fear? Does it make you... Are you concerned about what could happen in the future with your own health? And
yes, it does really, because I would never want Phil to go through what happened with me, watching Geoff get very, very sick, and then he took his own life, and that was all really awful. So although Geoff and I were pretty good at sort of talking about things, I've made it very clear to Phil, should that ever happen to me, then, you know, listen to me now, don't go down the plug hole with me. Just do the best you can, but don't lose your life on my account.
And how do you feel about people who may have to come in and care for you, people who would have to, you know, look after you maybe in later life?
Yeah. I think it's obviously SAND is a really good organisation, and so hopefully there's more awareness. But I think it's almost inevitable when you go across the health and social care sector, and having been involved quite a lot in looking for residential care, potentially for Geoff, the different departments of the hospitals, then Redwoods Hospital, it really is important that people don't make assumptions. I can't stress that more firmly, because you're putting a hurdle in people's way. And also don't assume that people have got partners anyway. And some recognition, although it's really hard, I think, for younger people to get, in having to make people sort of declare their sexuality, you are putting them back into stuff that they've had to do way back. And for people like me, from a time when the pressure, the dislike, the prejudice on gay men, obviously on lesbians too, but I can only speak from the heart for gay men, was just so horrendous. It's hard to communicate.
Did
really.
you experience that yourself? Did you experience, you know...
Well, in the sense of, yes, that whole period of being a teenager and into early 20s, and not having any positive reference. I think I was just lucky that for some reason I knew. I had an auntie who was very good, so I knew I was okay.
Is there any particular experience, Peter, in your past that you kind of still feel you carry round with you for today from you know, maybe your campaigning days?
Yeah, maybe two things. Once when I was early in my 20s, I was, as I've always been, a member of a trade union, and the union then was called NALGO, and I put forward a motion to the annual general meeting about something to do with gay rights, gay equality, non-discrimination, don't remember. I remember doing it. I felt incredibly nervous, because even then, which would have been late 70s, early 80s maybe, can't remember for sure, but you know, still very nerve-wracking to do it. And when I'd done it and, you know, stood to one side, then this he appeared much older bloke from the union came up to the microphone and just said, well, this is a very queer business, isn't it? And it felt like the whole room laughed, and I just felt absolutely sort of like stripped naked and very vulnerable. So I think I've always carried with me a certain fear of organisations. And the other is just showing affection in public. I mean, Geoff and I and friends used to walk arm in arm and hand in public, but it was always, you felt you were running a gauntlet. And people would shout from cars and be unpleasant. But, when you're young, you sort of are brave in a way. And so that's still with me. So even now with Phil, I find when I'm holding him by the arm, I will be saying to him, "Is this all right with you?" Because he was... he says he's an 80s guy and I'm a 70s guy, so I'm just checking he feels right. But it's partly that I'm feeling still not that comfortable with it, which is ridiculous. And I used to laugh with Geoff as we were walking around the pathways around Redwoods Hospital, and I was holding him and I was saying, "It's fine now, Geoff, because they'll just think we're a couple of old blokes holding each other up." But there was still, and still is within me, that sort of fear of attack. So therefore, in terms of accepting care from others, I don't want to overstate my case, but I need to know people there really isn't an issue. I don't want them to say, "Oh, well, we treat everybody equally." I want more than that. I want more of an understanding.
So, Peter, I understand you've recently moved house. You downsized. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. After Geoff's death, I mean, we had always planned to downsize, but that couldn't happen because of his illness. But I did move recently because we had a house on 5 floors in Castlefields. And I now live in a house which is on 2 floors, literally 2 minutes away. One of the things we wanted to do, though, was, and this does have a relationship to sexuality, was very much so to stay in the same neighbourhood, because we've been there, I suppose in total, well over 30 years in 2 different properties. So well known, so there was no... Like when we first came to Shrewsbury and went to Tankerville Street, there was there's a couple of queers moved into the street. I'm sure a black couple would have had the same thing, a couple of black people.
How did you feel, though, when you knew that kind of gossip was going around?
You just have to live with it, really. And it was something that, in London, you can be much more anonymous. You stand out when you come to a small town.
Obviously, moving to Shropshire, how did you find the LGBT plus community here in the county?
Well, there were. I mean, Shropshire had fairly early on, I think it was 1976, a Shropshire Gay Switchboard, it was called. So there was a network in Shropshire, but of course it was very different to London. An idea that came up, I know, we were working, that's right, Section 28 came in 1988, which was a pernicious piece of legislation. So a clampdown on what was seen as the promotion of homosexuality in schools and this notion of a pretended family, which came with it. And we wanted to do something about that in Shropshire because we realised that still after, way after Section 28 had been repealed, which was in 2004. So it lasted a long time. So as a whole generation, and through the AIDS period, it didn't help, of young men who didn't get any information at school to help protect them. And we realised come 2006 that there was still nothing really happening very much in the schools. So we organised a meeting of people in schools, and the way we did it was by showing a couple of films at the Old Market Hall, because people can engage with cinema. That went really well, and so we carried on the work in the schools, but we also thought, well, maybe a film festival would be a really great thing, because, again, it's a safe place to come, it's a nice place, it's got a cafe with it, and it developed over the years, starting in 2006 and until 2021. One of the things that came out of the Rainbow Film Festival was the screening of a film called Gen Silent, which is still probably the best film made about being LGBT plus and ageing, and how in some cases people of that older generation will return to the closet because they are afraid of the reception they will receive from caregivers or medical establishments, particularly if they've got some sort of strong religious background to them. And so out of showing that came the formation of SAND, which then went on to do the work that it did. And another thing that came out of it was because the Rainbow Film Festival became recognised nationally, there was an invitation to join the National LGBT History Festival, which was an annual event. And so we had that here in Shrewsbury over a number of years. And I really liked it because I quite like doing local history stuff. So it was good to discover significant LGBT plus people from the county.
Peter, thank you so much for coming and talking to us today on the Hearts and Histories podcast. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. Well, I feel very complimented to have been asked. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hearts and Histories, brought to you by the Shropshire Rainbow Film Festival and Embrace a Culture of Inclusion. If you haven't already, please check out the other 4 episodes of this series, which are available to watch and listen to. And if you found the content useful, we would love it if you could share it with other individuals and service providers who work with older and old people. If this has inspired you to make your own provision more inclusive to LGBT plus people, then head to lgbtsand.com to see more of our resources. These resources have been split into beginner, intermediate and advanced, and each resource includes an indication of how much time you need in order to get value from it. So whatever stage of the inclusion journey you're on, and however long you've got, these resources can help you to embrace a culture of inclusion.